Hello, everyone. Tonight we're going to slip quietly into a quiet California morning, a place where the fog hangs low over winding suburban streets, and the only sound is the rhythmic tap of running shoes on asphalt. You can picture her, blonde hair pulled into a ponytail, bright athletic gear, earbuds in, and a routine she's done 100 times before. The kind of morning where you think nothing could possibly go wrong. And yet, by the time the sun dips low again, Sherri Papini will have vanished completely, as though the air itself swallowed her up. A disappearance like this doesn't come with thunderclaps or flashing neon signs. It starts with something so ordinary you wouldn't notice it until it's too late. This is one of those cases that begins with fresh air and ends with unanswered questions, where every tiny detail will make you second-guess the entire story. A murder mystery has occurred, or at least, that's what everyone thinks at first thought. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you really like what I'm doing here. Drop a comment to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. You might find another night owl like yourself lurking in the replies. Now, turn off the lights, lie back on your comfy cushions, and let's get moving. Tonight, it's Thursday, November 2nd, 2016, in the small city of Redding, California. Sherri Papini, 34 years old, kisses her husband Keith goodbye in the morning. Keith heads off to work. Sherri has the day to herself. She's a stay-at-home mom with 2 young kids, both at daycare that morning, so she's got a rare pocket of time alone. Around mid-morning, she heads out for a run. Not a marathon, not even a long-distance route, just her usual neighborhood jog along Old Oregon Trail, a rural road with scattered homes, tall pines, and the occasional passing pickup truck. It's the kind of road where you wave to strangers because you've probably seen them at the grocery store. She's dressed for the mild weather. Running leggings, a long-sleeved shirt, hair tied back, phone in hand. At 10:37 a.m., she sends a quick text to her husband. "Are you coming home for lunch?" Keith doesn't reply right away. He's busy at work. This will be the last confirmed communication from her that morning. When Keith gets home later that day, the house feels wrong. No Sherri, no kids. The place is tidy. Nothing looks broken or ransacked. He checks the daycare. They say she never picked up the children. A prickle of fear works its way down his spine. This isn't just she's running late. Sherri is never late for the kids. Keith calls his mother. She hasn't heard from Sherri. He tries friends, no luck. He drives the jogging route she usually takes, scanning the ditches and driveways. It's late afternoon now. Shadows are stretching long over the road. At 5:51 p.m., he calls 911. His voice is tight, controlled, but you can hear the panic just under the surface. He tells the dispatcher his wife went jogging, she never came home, and her phone has gone straight to voicemail. Deputies from the Shasta County Sheriff's Office arrive quickly. They start retracing Sherri's route, and they're about a mile from her house. They find something that stops them cold. Her phone lying on the ground, screen cracked, earbuds wrapped loosely around it, and a few strands of hair tangled in the cord. It's as if someone set them there deliberately, neat enough to be noticed, messy enough to look like a struggle, Here's the thing: investigators know most abductions don't leave a crime scene this photogenic. Random kidnappers don't. Usually take the time to coil earbud wires before speeding away. But it's also too strange to dismiss as nothing. Historically, staged crime scenes have been part of some of the most infamous hoaxes in American true crime. Think of the 1920s. Crying kidnap scandals, where desperate publicity seekers planted clothing or personal effects to mislead police. Investigators are still debating whether this roadside discovery was a genuine clue or an intentional MISDI-RECTION. By now, word of her disappearance is racing through Reading. Keith's friends are calling. Neighbors are stepping out onto porches. And people are already posting on Facebook photos of Sherri, descriptions of her clothing, urgent pleas for anyone to come forward. In small towns, news travels fast, but fear travels faster. Keith, standing in the glow of red and blue flashing lights, is about to watch his world spin into chaos. He doesn't know yet that this will become one of the most sensational missing persons cases in California's recent history, and that the truth, when it comes, will be stranger than anyone's first guess. The search for Sherri Papini explodes overnight. By the next morning, November 3rd, the rolling hills and tree-lined back roads around Reading are swarming with volunteers. Deputies, K-9 units, and even drones scanning from above. The sheriff's office sets up a command post near Old Oregon Trail, and local news crews arrive with cameras rolling. Keith is there too, pacing, fielding calls, talking to detectives. His voice shakes as he gives interviews, pleading for Sherri's safe return. He holds up photos of her bright smile, sun-kissed hair, family snapshots that make her disappearance feel more personal to strangers. Watching from home. One thing stands out. There's no immediate sign of struggle anywhere along her route except the spot where the phone was found. No torn clothing, no shoe left behind, no drag marks in the dirt. It's the kind of void that makes you feel like someone planned it clean, fast, efficient. Sherri's case starts trending online. True crime blogs pick it up. The hashtag Bring Sherri Home begins circulating on Twitter and Instagram. People compare it to other high-profile cases: Lassie Peterson, Elizabeth Smart, women who became household names after sudden vanishings. Investigators begin digging into her life. Friends and family describe her as devoted to her children, deeply rooted in her church community, and happily married. No criminal record, no rumors of affairs or secret debts. But here's the strange detail. When deputies pull her phone records, they find that Sherri's jogging routine isn't always consistent. She sometimes runs in different areas, changes times, and doesn't always tell anyone exactly where she's going. That unpredictability would make it harder for a random stranger to plan an abduction. Unless, of course, they had been watching her for a while. The sheriff's office issues a bolo: be on the lookout for a dark SUV spotted in the general area around the time she disappeared. Multiple witnesses mention it, though no one can agree on the exact make or model. Was it a Tahoe? A Durango? One says black, another says dark blue, and still no license plate. Detectives also send her description nationwide. 5'3", 100 pounds, blonde hair, blue eyes. What they don't share publicly is the fact that they're already considering two possibilities. Either she was taken by someone she knew, or she was grabbed at random by someone very bold. A local coffee shop barista comes forward, claiming she saw a woman who looked like Sherri in the company of 2 other women the day after the disappearance. The woman seemed out of it, wearing clothes that didn't fit right. The barista didn't call police immediately, thinking maybe it was just a coincidence. By the time detectives follow up, the security footage has already been overwritten. That's the thing with missing persons. Time is the enemy. Every hour that passes without a solid lead is another step into the fog. Historically, FBI analysts have said the first 48 hours are critical in missing adults cases. After that, the likelihood of finding someone alive starts to dip sharply. Keith does something that raises eyebrows, but also makes headlines. He offers a $50,000 reward for Sherri's safe return. No questions asked. The money comes from a donation by an anonymous source, someone who says they were moved by the family's plight. Anonymous donors in these cases are rare, and sometimes their involvement becomes its own mystery. Investigators are still debating whether this particular donor was simply a good Samaritan or had some deeper connection to the story. The reward gets results, but not always the kind police want. Tips pour in. People swear they've seen her in Reno, in Portland, in a Walmart in Southern California. A psychic even calls to say Sherri is in a cabin surrounded by pine trees. Detectives dutifully check, but every lead fizzles. Meanwhile, the search radius expands. Crews scour creeks, search old barns, interview transient camps. Helicopters hover low over the countryside. At night, volunteers walk with flashlights, calling her name into the darkness. And yet, nothing. By day 5, the emotional temperature in Redding shifts. At first, there's shock, then fear, but now suspicion begins to creep in. People start whispering about the husband. It happens in almost every case like this. The spouse is always the first suspect. Keith insists he had nothing to do with it, willingly giving DNA samples, handing over his phone, even submitting to a polygraph. Detectives say he passed. Still, for Keith, the nightmare is only deepening. He can't eat, can't sleep. His kids keep asking where Mommy is. He doesn't know how to answer without lying. And then, late one night, an officer quietly tells him something chilling. In rare cases, missing persons are taken for weeks or even months before resurfacing. Sometimes alive, sometimes not. The implication hangs heavy in the air. If Sherri is still alive, where could she be? And if she's not, who's hiding her body so well? Day 6 begins with a cold, pale sunrise over the Sacramento Valley. The fog is thick enough to blur the outlines of the pines along Old Oregon Trail. Search teams gather at the command post, sipping lukewarm coffee from paper cups, their eyes scanning maps spread over folding tables. The sheriff's office is determined not to lose momentum. They start running roadblocks temporary, checkpoints on rural roads, stopping cars to ask drivers if they've seen anything unusual. Most say no. Some admit they've been following the case on the news, which means they're already primed to see things that may not be their dot in the background. FBI agents are quietly entering the picture. Federal involvement isn't always publicized. At first, but in high-risk abduction cases, it's common. They begin combing through Sherri's social media accounts, emails, and text messages. They're looking for threats, obsessive fans, or secret communications. And here's where things take an odd turn. They find that Sherri had recently exchanged messages with an old acquaintance, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. Content isn't overtly suspicious, but it's warm, friendly, and ends just days before she vanished. The acquaintance lives several states away. Detectives are still debating whether this connection was purely innocent or part of a larger puzzle. Meanwhile, the dark SUV sighting becomes more intriguing. A retired truck driver calls in, claiming he saw a vehicle matching that description parked awkwardly on a dirt turnout near Interstate 5 the afternoon Sherri disappeared. He says there was a man inside, mid-30s, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He remembers it because the man kept glancing into his rearview mirror, as if watching for someone. By the time investigators check the spot, there's nothing, just tire impressions too blurred to read. Keith, exhausted and desperate, records a video message addressed directly to Sherri. In it, he tells her how much the kids miss her, how her toothbrush is still in the bathroom, her favorite tea still in the pantry. He begs her captors, if that's who has her to please, just let her come home. The video goes viral, drawing sympathy and suspicion in equal measure. One unusual detail emerges from a neighbor's account. A few days before Sherri went missing, they noticed an unfamiliar car slowly driving up and down the road. It wasn't the dark SUV. It was a small, older sedan. The neighbor couldn't see the driver's face. Could it have been someone scouting her route? At this point, the sheriff holds another press conference. Standing at a podium under the weak November sun, he confirms that they're treating the case as an abduction. He also mentions, almost in passing, that they've received credible information that Sherri is still alive. He doesn't elaborate, and reporters pounce on the ambiguity. True crime forums explode with theories. Some users claim it's a cartel kidnapping. Others float the idea of a stalker who escalated. One even suggests she staged her disappearance to escape an unhappy marriage. Investigators keep their cards close to the vest, but privately, they're considering every possibility, including ones they'd rather not say out loud. By the second week, the mood in town is tense. Parents keep their children closer. Joggers avoid running alone. Small town life, where you wave to every passing car, suddenly feels less safe. And then comes a glimmer of hope. A tip from a woman in Yolo County, more than 100 miles south. She swears she saw a blonde woman matching Sherri's description at a gas station, accompanied by 2 Hispanic women. The blonde looked dazed, like she hadn't slept in days. The gas station security camera is checked, and indeed, it captures a brief, blurry image of a woman who could be Sherri. But the footage is grainy, the timestamp off by hours, and there's no way to confirm. For Keith, every lead is a cruel cycle. Hope surges, then collapses. Nights are the worst. He lies awake imagining her in some locked room, hungry, cold, wondering if anyone is looking for her. Statistically, investigators know that the longer an abduction goes on, the harder it is to maintain secrecy. Someone slips up. A neighbor hears something. A store clerk notices a strange interaction. A captor brags to the wrong person. They're waiting for that break. What they don't know yet is that the break is coming. and it will be unlike anything they've seen before. Thanksgiving morning in Reading is usually quiet families indoors, ovens working overtime, the smell of turkey and cinnamon drifting through neighborhoods. But this year, it's different. There's a current of unease running through the town. Patrol cars cruise slowly down residential streets, and the sheriff's department is working a skeleton crew holiday shift out at 4:30 a.m. A driver on Interstate 5 near Woodland sees something strange. A woman on the side of the road, waving frantically. She's dirty, thin, her hair tangled, wearing nothing but a thin gray sweatshirt and a chain around her waist. The driver calls 911. Within minutes, California Highway Patrol officers arrive. The woman is Sherri Papini. She's crying, shaking, her voice hoarse. She tells them she's been held captive by 2 Hispanic women for the past 22 days. She says they released her along the road before dawn, and she ran until she found help. Her wrists are raw, her nose is bruised, and there are marks on her ankles where she says she was restrained. Most shocking, she's branded. A crude burn mark, letters scorched into her skin, though she refuses to let anyone see the full design. When officers wrap her in a blanket and put her in the back of a cruiser, she keeps asking for Keith. They take her to a hospital in Yuba City, where she's reunited with him. Witnesses say the moment is overwhelming, Keith sobbing, Sherri clinging to him like she'll never let go. News of her recovery spreads within hours. TV stations cut into their morning shows with breaking news banners. Social media erupts. The narrative is almost cinematic. A beautiful young mom abducted, held for weeks, miraculously returned on Thanksgiving Day. But even in the midst of relief, strange details surface. Sherri claims her captors spoke mostly Spanish, kept there, faces covered, and threatened to kill her if she tried to escape. She says she was fed irregularly, sometimes only rice or tortillas, and forced to stay in a small, locked room. She also insists she doesn't know why she was taken. No ransom demands were ever made. Investigators, while relieved, are cautious. They note that in most abductions involving multiple captors, there's a higher risk of witnesses or physical evidence. Yet here, despite the length of her captivity, there are no confirmed sightings, no fingerprints, no clear motive. Detectives are still debating whether this was an opportunistic crime, a targeted abduction, or something even stranger. The medical report adds more curiosities. Sherri has lost significant weight, her hair is cut unevenly, and she has bruises in various stages of healing. But there's also DNA on her clothes, male and female, neither matching Keith. That detail is kept out of the press for now. Back at their home, the Papinis face a whirlwind. Supporters drop off flowers and food. Local churches hold prayer. Vigils. The sheriff urges the public to focus on the positive, that Sherri is alive. But online, speculation is already spiraling. Some can't reconcile the story. 2 mysterious women, no ransom, a sudden release in the middle of nowhere. One unusual twist comes from Sherri herself. She refuses to do media interviews. Her family says she's too traumatized, suffering nightmares, afraid to even step outside. Law enforcement agrees to limit questioning, hoping she'll open up gradually. But in the meantime, the lack of details feeds a growing sense of mystery. Thanksgiving ends with the Papinis together, their children, asleep in their own beds. Keith posts a brief message thanking the community and God for bringing Sherri home. It reads like the end of a nightmare, but for investigators, it's not an ending. It's the beginning of a far more complicated chapter. Because surviving an abduction is one thing. Explaining it, proving it, and finding the people responsible, that's something else entirely. And as the weeks roll on, that's exactly where the story will start to fracture. The days after Sherri's return feel like a strange blend of relief and unfinished business. The sheriff's office holds a press conference, but it's light on specifics. Cameras capture the sheriff saying they have credible evidence of her abduction and that they're pursuing multiple leads. He mentions 2 Hispanic women as suspects, one older, one younger, both armed, but releases no names. The composite sketches are promised, but not yet ready. Instead, reporters are left with a description that could fit hundreds of people. One with curly hair, the other with straight, both wearing masks during the captivity. This lack of concrete details makes the public uneasy inside the investigation. Suspicions are brewing. Detectives have seen hundreds of kidnapping cases, and something about this one isn't quite fitting. The clean placement of her phone and earbuds on the roadside still gnaws at them. In genuine abductions, personal items are rarely left so neatly. Was this a taunt from the kidnappers, or was it meant to look like one? Keith is unwavering in his belief in his wife's story. He becomes her public shield, declining most interview requests, but giving a few carefully chosen statements to national outlets. In one emotional moment on Good Morning America, he says Sherri's release was a Thanksgiving miracle, and that she endured unimaginable horrors. His conviction resonates with some, but others find the story too perfect, too cinematic. Behind closed doors, investigators start mapping out a timeline of Sherri's movements, at least the ones they can verify. The problem? After she disappeared, there's a 22-day void. No confirmed sightings, no credit card activity, no ransom calls except one hoax email traced to an out-of-state prankster. Even traffic cameras yield nothing. And then there's the branding. In interviews, Sherri claims the berm was meant as a form of ownership by her captors. But when detectives ask for more specifics, she becomes evasive. She won't explain the letters or symbols, saying only that it's too traumatic. That's unusual. Most victims are desperate to give any detail that could lead to their abductors. The FBI analysts assigned to the case begin looking into broader patterns. Are there similar abductions in nearby counties? Any unsolved kidnappings involving female perpetrators? The answer is not really. The 2 women element is rare, almost unheard of, which makes it harder to cross-reference with other cases. At the same time, the Papini home is under a microscope. Detectives quietly pull phone records, interview friends, and try to understand the couple's financial and personal situation. They find no glaring red flags, no massive debts, no clear enemies, but they do note periods of marital strain. In the past, Keith brushes off those questions as irrelevant. The public face of the investigation remains hopeful. Flyers still hang in shop windows, offering tips hotlines and urging people to report anything suspicious. But under the surface, There's a growing list of inconsistencies. One particularly strange moment comes when Sherri's sister, Sheila, tells a reporter that she had almost given up hope before Sherri's return. "It's like something out of a movie," she says, her voice wavering. "But movies have endings. I don't think this is over." That sentiment, whether she realizes it or not, echoes exactly what investigators are thinking. Even with the case still officially active, the public's energy starts to wane. Without arrests or clear updates, people move on to other headlines. The search for two masked Hispanic women becomes less of a mission and more of a ghost story locals tell when passing the lonely stretch of Old Oregon Trail Road. And yet, inside the sheriff's office, the case file grows thicker. There's DNA from Sherri's clothing, still unmatched. There are recorded interviews that hint at contradictions. And there's a quiet, persistent question that no one can quite shake. If Sherri was truly abducted, why does so much of her story resist the evidence? Investigators and detectives are still debating whether this is a case of a rare, bizarre crime or the beginnings of something far more elaborate and self-made. The ransom angle arrives not with a bang, but with a faint digital echo. About a week after Sherri's return, the sheriff's office receives an email from an anonymous address. The message claims to be from her captors, demanding a six-figure sum for full details of her disappearance, along with the promise to hand over evidence of what happened. Detectives can tell almost immediately that the email is suspicious. The writing is sloppy, the threats vague. Still, protocol demands they follow up. They forward the message to the FBI's cybercrimes unit, who trace it to a man in Michigan, a self-proclaimed internet prankster who swears he just wanted to see his name in the news. He gets a stern warning and a knock on the door from local law enforcement. But he's clearly not the mastermind behind Sherri's vanishing. That dead end doesn't stop more strange tips from pouring in. Someone claims to have seen two women matching the vague suspect description at a Walmart in Nevada. Another caller says she heard Spanish-speaking voices arguing in a white SUV outside Redding. None of these leads pan out at the same time. The Papini family's media presence begins to change. Early on, Keith was the voice of the family, controlled and emotional in just the right doses. But now, Sherri is slowly stepping into the spotlight. She doesn't appear on camera yet, claiming she's still too shaken, but she releases a written statement through an attorney, thanking everyone who helped bring her home. Her statement contains a detail that catches investigators' attention. She says her captors played mind games and told her no one was looking for her. It's an odd thing to emphasize, especially since the search effort was massive and highly publicized. Detectives note this in the case file. The ransom theme keeps weaving itself into the narrative in strange ways. Even without credible demands, whispers spread online that Sherri's kidnapping must have been financially motivated. After all, she came back alive. Was someone paid to release her? Law enforcement won't confirm or deny anything, but off the record, one detective admits that no verified payment ever took place. Inside the investigation, they're now juggling two tracks. One is the classic abduction theory. Two women kidnapped Sherri, held her in a concealed location, and then inexplicably released her. The other is the staged event theory. Sherri orchestrated the disappearance with or without help, and is now maintaining the story under mounting public and police scrutiny. Each theory has sticking points. If it was a real abduction, why no ransom calls during the 22 days she was gone? Why release her alive at all? If it was staged, why endure injuries, weight loss, and branding? Was she willing to put herself through physical pain for the sake of what exactly? One of the more unusual tips comes from a retired detective living 2 counties away. He calls the sheriff's office and suggests they consider a voluntary missing scenario gone wrong. He points out that in some cases, people disappear to escape personal problems, but then return with an invented story to avoid embarrassment. It's not an accusation, just a possibility, yet it's one the active investigators have already been quietly discussing. The FBI expands its profile on the supposed kidnappers. 2 women working together for nearly a month, keeping a victim alive but hidden, is statistically rare. Stranger still, there are no reports of suspicious female pairs in the area during that time. It's as if the suspects only existed in Sherri's account. Meanwhile, the Papini's neighbors are beginning to shift in tone. While some remain fiercely supportive, others admit off the record that they're confused. One says, "We want to believe her, but every time we hear the story, a little something changes." The sheriff's office remains tight-lipped publicly, but privately, they're growing frustrated. Every new twist seems to lead back to the same place. A blurry image of 2 masked women, a story that can't be verified, and a victim who seems to have answers she won't share. Investigators and detectives are still debating whether this ransom angle was ever real, or just a convenient red herring dropped into the story, either by a prankster or by someone far closer to the case. Thanksgiving has passed, and the Papini home is quiet from the outside, but inside, the atmosphere feels anything but settled. Sherri is recovering physically, her bruises fading, her hair growing back where it was cut, but the mental weight of her story is another matter. Keith has taken time off work to be with her, shielding her from media requests and unwanted visits. The sheriff's office, however, isn't taking any time off. With the ransom angle a bust, their focus shifts to forensics. Sherri's clothing, the rope, and the tape are sent to the California Department of Justice Crime Lab for deeper analysis. The items yield almost nothing: no fingerprints, no traceable fibers, and the DNA profiles they do find don't match anyone in CODIS. The only foreign DNA of note is that male sample found earlier, still unidentified. Then comes something strange. When the lab processes the underwear Sherri was wearing when found, they detect DNA from an unknown man and a partial profile from an unknown woman. Neither matches Keith, Sherri, or any suspect in their databases. That detail never makes the press, but within the investigation, it adds another layer of what exactly happened out there. Detectives request to interview Sherri again, hoping her memory has sharpened with time. The second interview feels different. She's more guarded now, answering questions with shorter phrases, and sometimes deflecting with "I don't remember," where she had given more detail before. One inconsistency stands out. In her first interview, she said her captors always kept her indoors. Now she mentions being taken outside once, at night, for air. She says she could smell pine trees and distant smoke, and she thinks she heard a train. Detectives circle those details. They could point to a location. They compare her statement with environmental data and rail maps, but nothing obvious connects Dot in the small California city where the Papinis live. Whispers continue to grow. Local radio talk shows debate the story daily. Callers ask, if Sherri was really taken by strangers, why hasn't a composite sketch been released? Why hasn't there been any warning to women in the area about potential abductors still at large? One of the more bizarre rumors comes from a nearby gas station attendant. He tells a customer, who later tells a reporter, that he saw a blonde woman who looked like Sherri buying snacks with two women about a week before Thanksgiving. He claims she didn't look afraid. When police interview him, his story changes slightly, and they eventually rule him unreliable. The strain on the Papini's marriage is starting to show, though Keith keeps a united front in public. Friends say privately that he's torn. He wants to protect Sherri, but the questions are getting harder to ignore. Then, the case takes a subtle but important turn. The sheriff's office gets a hit from the male DNA found on Sherri's clothing. Not a match in the criminal system, but a familial link, a distant relative. That relative lives out of state and has no known connection to the Papinis. This discovery prompts the FBI to consider using advanced genealogy tracing, but in 2016, such methods are still in their infancy compared to later years. The odd part? This familial DNA link does connect loosely through a web of relatives to someone Sherri once knew. Investigators keep that fact quiet, but internally, it raises the question, was her kidnapping circle smaller than she claimed? Through it all, Sherri maintains her position. She was abducted, she survived, and she doesn't know why she was released. The sheriff's office keeps interviewing anyone who might have crossed paths with her in the months leading up to her disappearance. They're looking for old grudges, failed friendships, money troubles, anything that could serve as a motive. Nothing solid emerges, but the strange undercurrent persists. It's as though the story's pieces almost fit, but one or two edges are shaved, just enough to keep the puzzle forever incomplete. Investigators and detectives are still debating whether her evolving memories represent genuine trauma confusion or careful editing of a narrative that was never quite true to begin with. Nearly 2 years have passed since the frantic search for Sherri Papini gripped her small Northern California community. Publicly, the case looks like it's gone cold. No suspects have been arrested. No new appeals for tips are made on the evening news, and the sketches of the mysterious 2 Hispanic women that Sherri once described have faded into the archives. Privately, though, the case is still alive, barely breathing, but alive. Detectives keep a dusty file on the corner of their desks, and every so often they revisit it, chasing whatever slim lid floats to the surface. By 2018, DNA genealogy has become a sharper tool in law enforcement, thanks to high-profile breakthroughs like the Golden State Killer case. And tucked inside the Papini file is that unresolved male DNA sample, patiently waiting for science to catch up. Meanwhile, life for Sherri and Keith moves forward, at least on the surface. They relocate to a quieter neighborhood, away from prying eyes. The kids are older now and don't fully remember the days when their mother was the missing woman on TV. Keith takes on more work. Sherri rarely ventures far from home, and family photos show them smiling at barbecues and school events. But the cracks are still there. Friends quietly notice that Sherri avoids certain topics. Any mention of the investigation brings a tight smile and a quick change of subject. Her neighbors notice that she checks the mail at odd hours, sometimes late at night. And in one odd moment, a delivery driver recalls her stepping outside to accept a package, glancing nervously down the street before rushing back inside. Sheriff's Department, frustrated but persistent, eventually hands the DNA to the FBI for a full genetic genealogy profile. Months pass before a lead returns, but when it does, it's unexpected. A relative in Michigan, not in California, is the closest known match. That relative has no criminal history, no known ties to Sherri, but his family tree branches in interesting directions. One of those branches leads to an ex-boyfriend of Sherri's from many years earlier, a man named James Reyes. He's never been a suspect before. He lives in Southern California now, works a regular job, and has a quiet life. But he's connected distantly to the DNA profile through extended family. Detectives don't go knocking on his door right away. Instead, they do what they do best: build the background. They learn that James and Sherri had reconnected briefly in the past, years before the disappearance. Nothing public, nothing scandalous, just a thread in the web. They also learned that James has no criminal record, no history of violence, and according to a few old acquaintances, wouldn't hurt a fly. It's almost too quiet, too clean. And that, for seasoned investigators, is suspicious in itself. In late 2019, with the trail still tepid, the FBI decides to test the waters. An agent makes a casual phone call to James under the guise of verifying family information for the genealogy match. James is polite, cooperative until the topic of Sherri comes up. Then there's a pause, just a second too long before he says, "Oh, yeah, I remember her." That pause is all it takes to reignite the fire in the Papini case file. The agent notes it, the tone shift, the verbal hedging. They decide to keep watching James quietly, collecting small pieces. His travel history, financial records, any potential connection to Sherri in the months before November 2016. While all of this simmers, the community's collective memory of the Papini disappearance turns into something else entirely, half cautionary tale, half urban legend. People still tell newcomers about the woman who was taken for 3 weeks and lived, but now they say it with a knowing look, a tilt of the head as if to add, but there's more to it than that. Investigators and detectives are still debating whether the long silence in the case is the calm before the storm or proof that the storm was never real in the first place. Thanksgiving morning, 2016. While most people are still tangled in their bedsheets, the air outside is cold enough to bite your lungs. Along a lonely stretch of County Road 17 in Yolo County, a driver spots something unexpected, someone standing. On the side of the road, waving frantically, it's a woman. She's thin, pale, her hair matted, and she looks like she hasn't eaten a proper meal in weeks. Her clothes are torn, her wrists are chained, and she's clutching something like it's the last thing holding her to the world, a piece of cloth. Filthy and frayed, the driver slows down, unsure if this is real. It feels surreal, like walking into the final scene of a thriller. Then the woman steps closer to the headlights, and her voice cracks. "Help me," she says. "Please, I'm Sherri." Within minutes, sheriff's deputies and medics are on the scene. They cut the chains from her wrists, wrap her in blankets, and rush her toward a hospital in Woodland. The reports go out almost instantly. Sherri Papini has been found alive. After 22 days missing, she's back, but the way she's back raises more questions than answers. Inside the ambulance, Sherri is shivering, not just from the cold, but from something deeper. She tells the deputies fragments of a story. 2 Hispanic women, one older and one younger, abducted her at gunpoint while she was jogging, held her in a dark room, and abused her for weeks before dumping her by the roadside early this morning. Her voice is thin, and her eyes dart as if expecting those women to appear at any second dot at the hospital. Keith bursts through the doors, nearly colliding with a nurse. When he sees Sherri, he breaks. He holds her like he's afraid she's afraid again. They cry together for a long minute before Keith whispers, "You're home now." Doctors examine her injuries, bruises, cuts, and a distinctive mark on her right shoulder that looks like it's been burned. There's also something stranger. She appears to have lost a significant amount of weight, but her vital signs are surprisingly stable for someone claiming weeks of captivity. Detectives waste no time. Between medical checks, they gently press for details. Where was she kept? How did she escape? Did she hear any names? Any street noises? Any accents? Sherri's answers are cautious, like someone walking barefoot over broken glass. She says she was kept in a small locked room with the windows boarded up. The 2 women spoke Spanish too. Each other never used names and wore masks much of the time. When asked why she was taken, she shakes her head. "I don't know," she whispers. By the afternoon, the FBI is looped in. The case, already high profile, has now become something rarer, a missing person who returns alive with a harrowing story. News helicopters circle the area where she was found, broadcasting live shots of the empty roadside. In interviews, law enforcement officials call it an active and developing situation, carefully avoiding any declaration that the abductors are still in the area as evening falls. Keith releases a statement thanking the community and law enforcement. The public reaction is overwhelming. People who never met Sherri post online about crying when they heard she was safe. A few skeptics murmur about how strange it all seems, but in the flood of relief, their voices are lost. Back in her hospital room, Sherri drifts in and out of sleep, her hand always curled around Keith's. Outside, deputies stand watch, just in case. Inside, the story of what happened is only beginning to take shape, and already, some investigators are quietly noting the gaps between the details she gives and the physical evidence they're gathering. Investigators and detectives are still debating whether her rescue marks the end of the nightmare or the start of an even more tangled one. In the days following her rescue, the hospital becomes less a place of healing and more a command center. Detectives move in and out like actors in a stage play, each carrying their own questions, each watching Sherri closely, not just for her answers, but for how she delivers them. Sherri sits propped up in bed, her hair freshly washed for the first time in nearly a month, though the bruises on her arms and face are still visible. She tells her story in small bursts, as if revisiting each memory costs her something. She says she was jogging when a dark SUV pulled up beside her. Two Hispanic women, one young, one older, jumped out, forced her inside, and covered her head with a bag. From there, she describes a long drive, turns she couldn't count, and the feeling of being taken far away from home. She claims she was held in a cramped room with boarded-up windows, the walls bare and cold. The women would sometimes speak Spanish, but never in a way she could fully understand. When asked about what she ate, she recalls bits of tortillas, broth, and occasionally an apple. It's enough to keep her alive, but leaves her weak and constantly hungry. Then come the stranger details. The women cutting her hair short, allegedly to change her appearance. A brand on her right shoulder burned into her skin with a heated tool whose meaning she doesn't know. At one point, she says she was forced to wear a chain around her waist, padlocked to her wrists. And perhaps most chilling, she says she was told she was being kept for a purpose she wouldn't understand yet. Investigators listen, but they can't ignore the inconsistencies. For example, Sherri describes being locked away without sunlight, yet her skin doesn't show the kind of paleness one might expect after nearly a month indoors. She claims the women wore masks almost constantly, but also provides detailed sketches of their facial features. The FBI brings in a trained forensic interviewer who gently pushes her for more specifics. Did she hear any background sounds, trains, church bells, traffic? Sherri says she heard what might have been a television in another room, playing Spanish soap operas, and once, faintly, the sound of a freight train. Keith sits through most of these interviews, his hand wrapped around hers, his jaw tight. Whenever she hesitates or starts to cry, he leans in with a reassuring whisper. The bond between them seems unshakable to outsiders, but to seasoned detectives, his constant presence makes it harder to know whether she's telling them everything. She knows. Meanwhile, the public narrative is set. Sherri Papini, mother of two, has survived a horrific abduction and returned against all odds. Local news runs features on her miracle comeback. Social media lights up with posts celebrating her survival. But inside law enforcement circles, conversations are less celebratory. They've seen cases where survivors tell the truth, and cases where, well, the truth is more complicated. Detectives collect every scrap of evidence from her body and belongings, DNA swabs, fibers, the chains she was wearing, even the clothing she was found in. They send it all to the lab. If there's any hope of catching these alleged captors, it will be in the science, not just the story. In one late-night session, a detective asks her bluntly why she thinks she was released instead of killed. Sherri pauses for a long time, then says, "I think they were done with me. Or maybe they got scared." It's a simple answer, but her eyes don't quite meet his. By the time she's discharged, law enforcement has what feels like a partial map of a crime scene they can't locate. They have suspects with no names, a room with no address, and a victim whose ordeal is either the work of dangerous strangers or something far more tangled. Investigators and detectives are still debating whether her survival is the lucky break it appears to be, or if the real story is still locked away somewhere inside her. The release of the suspect sketches is meant to be a turning point. Two faces rendered in careful strokes stare out from the FBI bulletin. One older woman with sharp cheekbones and a hard stare, the other younger with softer features, but eyes that seem to narrow into suspicion. Both are labeled simply as female Hispanic suspects. News outlets splash the images across screens and front pages. Every viewer is urged to look closely. Call if you know them. Tip lines open and calls pour in by the hundreds. Some are dead ends before they're even logged. I saw a woman like that at Walmart, or looks like my cousin's neighbor. Others seem promising until they crumble under follow-up questioning. Still, for a week or two, there's energy in the investigation. Detectives drive out to remote farms, warehouses, and trailer parks on the slimmest of leads. They knock on doors, show the sketches, ask about vehicles, listen for stories of sudden disappearances or suspicious behavior. Each time they return. With nothing concrete, then, the inconsistencies start to pile up. Eyewitnesses who claim to have seen Sherri during her captivity can't provide details that match her own account. A man swears he saw a young woman with short blonde hair in the back of a dark SUV, but the date he provides is 2 weeks after she says her hair was cut. Another person claims they saw a Hispanic woman buying restraints at a hardware store, but store records show no such purchase. Behind the scenes, law enforcement agencies are split. Some still believe this is a straightforward abduction, albeit by elusive and possibly transient suspects. Others, especially in the FBI, are starting to whisper doubts. In the press, however, the story remains intact. Keith makes emotional appearances on television, describing his wife's suffering in vivid detail, from her weight loss to the brand on her shoulder. He urges the public to stay vigilant, to keep searching for the dangerous people still out there. His devotion draws sympathy, though to investigators, it's becoming harder to separate the emotion from the facts. The sketches themselves take on a strange life online. Amateur sleuths dissect them, noting the heavy eyebrows on the younger woman or the cartoon villain look of the older one. Some compare them to famous faces, actresses, politicians, even a controversial talk show host turning the search into a mix of serious investigation and meme culture. Break is supposed to come when a tipster claims to know the younger suspect. She's said to live in Nevada, have ties to California, and even drive a dark SUV. But when detectives track her down, the alibi is airtight. She was out of the country during Sherri's disappearance. Her passport stamps and flight records leave no room for doubt. As the weeks roll on, the once promising sketches start to feel like ghosts' faces that exist only in memory, or perhaps in imagination. Detectives quietly acknowledge that, if they were accurate, someone should have recognized them by now. The lack of progress raises an uncomfortable question. What if these faces were never real to begin with? Still, the public doesn't know that doubt is seeping into the case. Officially, the search continues. Flyers remain taped to store windows. Reward money is still on the table, and officers repeat the mantra, "We just need one good lead, investigators. And detectives are still debating whether they're chasing two real women through the back roads of California, or if they've been handed a story that was never meant to be solved. The cracks that had been quietly forming in the official story now begin to spread in ways that can't be ignored. At first, it's small things, the kind of inconsistencies investigators know to expect in trauma narratives. Victims misremember. Details confuse dates or unintentionally blend events together. But with Sherri Papini, the gaps aren't shrinking as the weeks pass. They're widening. The timeline is one of the first points of tension. When she was rescued, Sherri claimed she'd been released at dawn, yet cell phone tower records suggest her location data was active at a completely different time. The cuts on her wrists appear fresh to match her claim of weeks in captivity with constant restraints. Her hair, said to have been hacked off early in her ordeal, shows less regrowth than expected. Detectives review her statements against the evidence, and the contradictions stack like a dangerous tower. The length of the chain she described doesn't match the marks left on her ankles. The beating she endured left no bruises consistent with blunt force trauma, only superficial injuries. Even the brand on her shoulder, initially believed to be a sign of gang involvement, shows odd characteristics, almost as if it were amateur work rather than something inflicted by a criminal organization. Meanwhile, the forensic team quietly shares another red flag. No foreign DNA is found on her clothes, her bindings, or her body. Nothing to link the mystery captors to her alleged ordeal. The one DNA sample recovered from her remains stubbornly unidentified. Still, detectives tread carefully. To publicly doubt a victim, especially one whose case has drawn national attention, is to risk public outrage. And Keith, standing firmly by his wife, continues to project unwavering belief. In television interviews, he's almost defiant, repeating her account word for word as though memorizing it into reality. But whispers spread in law enforcement circles. One deputy confides to a colleague, "If we didn't have media breathing down our necks, we'd be looking in a very different direction." Another investigator starts quietly reviewing old police reports connected to Sherri's strange incidents from before her disappearance, moments that suggest a pattern of dramatic behavior. The local FBI office pushes for more in-depth forensic testing, but even they are careful to keep their doubts internal. Outwardly, the official stance is the same. Two dangerous suspects are still at large, and the community must remain vigilant. It's in this climate of growing unease that an outside analyst brought in to review the behavioral aspects of the case drops a pointed observation. Her story contains highly specific details that are easy to imagine but hard to verify. That's not uncommon in fabrications. The remark doesn't make it into the official reports, but it sticks in the minds of those present. Still, despite the mounting evidence that something isn't adding up, the investigation stalls. Without proof of a hoax, the case remains classified as an abduction. Publicly, Sherri is still the brave mother who survived weeks of torment. Privately, more and more detectives are starting to believe they're chasing shadows. Investigators and detectives are still debating whether the inconsistencies in Sherri's story are the result of trauma or the careful construction of an elaborate fiction. This stalemate can't last forever. For years, The official version of events sits in limbo, untouchable by conclusive evidence, but constantly shadowed by doubt. The case file grows dusty, but it's never closed. Every now and then, a tip trickles. In a supposed sighting of the mysterious women, a claim from someone who heard something in a neighboring town, but each lead dissolves under scrutiny. Then, in 2020, a quiet breakthrough happens in a lab. The unidentified male DNA found on Sherri's clothing, once a dead end, finally hits a match. It belongs not to some unknown gang member or stranger in a van, but to an ex-boyfriend of Sherri's. The revelation sends ripples through the investigative team. They track the man down, and he tells a story that shatters what little trust remains in Sherri's account. According to him, she had contacted him before her disappearance, asking for help to get away from her home life. He claims she stayed with him willingly for weeks, hiding out in his apartment hundreds of miles away, never restrained, never harmed. The injuries? Self-inflicted, he says, in the final days before she reappeared. It's a bombshell, but one that still needs corroboration. The man provides details only someone with direct involvement could know: the type of food she ate, the shows she binge-watched, even the particular brand of cleaning product she insisted on buying. Detectives verify these small, mundane facts and find them alarmingly consistent with receipts, security footage, and even search histories. Piece by piece, the narrative tilts. Investigators uncover text messages between Sherri and her ex that suggest she planned her vanishing act meticulously. There's even a message in which she warns him not to speak to the police under any circumstances. Yet, the biggest hurdle remains: public perception. For years, Sherri has been the face of a terrifying abduction story. To turn around and declare it all a hoax risks not just her reputation, but the credibility of the agencies that championed her case. Internally, they weigh the cost. Do they? Drag the truth into the open, or let it fade into quiet ambiguity? The decision becomes easier when they realize something else. This wasn't Sherri's first brush with deception. Old police reports reveal a history of making bizarre accusations, including one instance where she accused her own mother of abuse, only for the claim to collapse under investigation by late 2021. The pieces are too solid to ignore. The FBI prepares an arrest warrant, choosing to move with precision rather than drama. They know that when this goes public, the reaction will be explosive. The victim the world rallied behind will instead be seen as a manipulator who staged her own vanishing and dragged the nation along for the ride. When the moment comes, it's strangely anticlimactic. Sherri is taken into custody without incident, the charge sheet long and damning, making false statements, lying to federal agents, and wasting enormous investigative resources. The news breaks, and the shock is immediate. Neighbors who once taped flyers to their windows now speak of feeling played. Comment sections fill with outrage, disbelief, and occasionally a kind of grim satisfaction from those who'd suspected the truth all along. Still, a question lingers. Why? Why orchestrate such an elaborate deception? Financial strain? A craving for attention? Or a deeply rooted psychological need to cast herself as both heroine and victim? Investigators and psychologists are still debating whether her actions were driven primarily by manipulation or by an untreated mental health condition, one that made her believe the fiction she created. The confession doesn't explode out of her in a single dramatic moment. It leaks slowly, like water through a hairline crack. At first, Sherri sits in the interview room, back straight, eyes wide, the practiced image of a woman wronged. She repeats her old story in rehearsed beats. The two Hispanic women, the chains, the threats whispered in the dark. But the agents aren't biting this time. They slide photographs across the table, receipts from a hardware store near her ex-boyfriend's home, showing purchases made during the weeks she was missing. Security stills of her walking casually, in and out of a convenience store. Hair uncovered, no bruises in sight. Text messages where she joked about cooking dinner. The ex's sworn statement, matching every TIMESTAMP dot at first. She tries to explain it away. That's not me. I don't remember that. But each denial collapses under the weight of another piece of evidence. Finally, she exhales long, sharp, and the first admission comes. Yes, she stayed with him. Yes, she asked for his help. Once the dam breaks, the truth comes out in uneven bursts. She says she needed a break, that her marriage felt suffocating, that she wanted to reset her life without anyone knowing where she was. She claims the injuries she had when she was found: bruises, a broken nose, a brand on her shoulder, were self-inflicted or done with her ex's reluctant help to make her story believable. The agents listen, taking notes, occasionally asking her to clarify. Their tone is calm, but there's an undercurrent of disbelief. The more she talks, the more the bizarre details of her lies stand out, shaving her head to look abused, deliberately losing weight, practicing a frightened expression in the mirror. Sherri never gives a neat, satisfying why. Her reasons shift like sand. Sometimes she blames stress, sometimes fear, sometimes a desire to punish her husband. But one thread runs through all of it: control. She wanted to control the narrative, the sympathy, the way people saw her. When the interview ends, the room feels heavier. The agents know that this isn't just a case of lying to law enforcement. It's a deception that pulled in hundreds of people, from neighbors to FBI agents, from news anchors to perfect strangers across the country who prayed for her safety. The prosecutors are ready. In March 2022, Sherri Papini appears in federal court, where she pleads guilty to making false statements to a federal officer and mail fraud, the latter tied to the victim compensation funds she received after her supposed abduction. The plea deal spares her from a longer trial, but the sentencing still delivers a sharp message. 18 months in prison, plus restitution, more than $300,000 to cover the cost of the investigation. The public watches, fascinated and furious. Same headlines that once pleaded for her safe return now brand her as the California mom who faked her own kidnapping. Talk shows dissect her every motive. Psychologists speculate on her mindset. And online forums turn her case into a cautionary tale about false victims and squandered resources. Yet, even with her confession on the record, there's a strange undertone of mystery left. Some people, though far fewer than before, insist she must have been pressured into admitting guilt, that there's more to the story. Others see her as a master manipulator who will never tell the full truth. The agents, though, aren't confused. They close the file knowing that while the case was technically solved, It left behind damage far harder to repair than any physical injury. Trust shattered in a small community, skepticism toward future missing persons reports, and the lingering unease that sometimes the people we rally behind are the ones holding the strings. The dust doesn't settle easily after Sherri's sentencing. In Reading, the small-town warmth that once fueled candlelight vigils and search parties turns brittle. Neighbors who once spoke of her with tenderness now lower their voices or cut conversations short. The bright yellow welcome home Sherri ribbons that once fluttered from mailboxes are long gone, pulled down quietly, almost in embarrassment. Keith Papini, the man who stood in front of television cameras begging for his wife's safe return, files for divorce. His court filings are blunt. The marriage, he says, is beyond repair. He's left to raise their children alone, shielding them from the storm, while trying to answer questions they're far too young to carry. Friends say he looks thinner, quieter, as though the scandal aged him years in just a few seasons. Across law enforcement circles, Sherri's case becomes an unspoken cautionary tale. Deputies and agents remember the man-hours, the helicopter sweeps, the roadblocks, all resources pulled from other investigations because they believed a woman's life was on the line. They talk about it in clipped tones, aware that the next missing person case could be genuine, and cynicism could cost a real victim their life. The media, too, moves on, but not completely. Every time a high-profile disappearance makes national headlines, Sherri's name resurfaces in comparisons and think pieces. She's become a benchmark for deception as shorthand for what if it's fake. Some call it the Papini effect, the lingering suspicion that even the most compelling victim might be lying in prison. Sherri reportedly keeps to herself, her once camera-ready smile replaced with the flat expression of someone playing for time. There are whispers from other inmates about how she still insists, in private, that parts of her kidnapping story were true. Whether that's denial, manipulation, or some blend of both is impossible to say. When she's released in 2023 after serving her sentence, the welcome she once dreamed of is absent. No cheering crowds, no news vans, just the click of a gate and the quiet knowledge that she's returning to a world far more skeptical than the one she left. She slips into a rented home under a new rhythm. Her name still known, but her life far smaller. And yet, the legacy of her story lingers beyond her. It's in the investigators who double-check every odd detail in a missing persons case file. It's in the families of real victims who fear being doubted because someone once lied so convincingly. It's in the quiet moments when a news viewer watching another desperate plea for help wonders, if only for a second, whether they're seeing truth or performance. The Sherri Papini case may have been solved, but in its own way, it remains a mystery. Not of who took her, but of why she felt the need to create the lie in the first place, and why so many of us believed it so completely. If you've been with me all the way through this story, you know that sometimes the answers we get aren't the ones we want. The Sherri Papini case began like 100 other true crime stories. An ordinary person vanishes, a town rallies, and hope battles against fear. But instead of an unseen villain or a tragic twist, the ending here was a mirror, reflecting the face of the person we thought we were trying to save. It's tempting to put her in a box. Villain, liar, attention seeker. But cases like this never fit neatly. There's a human need for understanding, for a tidy motive that explains everything, but sometimes all you get are fragments, pieces that don't quite fit, no matter how you turn them. What's left is the lesson. That trust, once broken, doesn't knit back together quickly. That resources spent chasing shadows can't be reclaimed. And that the stories we tell about ourselves, whether to the world or just to the mirror, can be as dangerous as they are powerful. So as you turn off the lights tonight, remember, not every mystery ends with a shadowy figure in the dark. Sometimes the most chilling twist is when the danger comes from the person standing in the center of the spotlight. No, turn off the lights, lie back on your comfy cushions, and let's get moving tonight.